Okay, well, I think we're getting ready to start it. So first of all, thanks everyone for coming to today's session. We're going to talk about how you can manage your hybrid cloud and transform your workplace using PowerShell and Azure Automation. My name's Eamon O'Reilly. I work on the Azure Automation service, and with me today is...
I'm Hemant Mahavar, and I work on PowerShell.
And I am Joey Aiello, and I'm also a PM on PowerShell. Thanks
Awesome.
for coming today, guys.
So we got a great few things to talk about today, but I want to kind of level set so everyone knows how we're going to go through today's session. The first thing we're going to talk about is how do you enable continuous management in a DevOps world? And this is really about how do you actually start to work closely with those dev teams as you bring all of your core management requirements into that system. And then the second thing we're going to talk about is how do you automate in a heterogeneous environment? And when we talk about heterogeneous, we're really talking about you've got a hybrid cloud where you've got a lot of your resources on premises, you've got others up in the cloud, plus you also have Windows and Linux that you want to manage. And then lastly, we're going to talk about how we're starting to bring PowerShell to the cloud and across all the platforms. And this is really about what we're doing with PowerShell 6, plus also how we're doing PowerShell and Cloud Shell. So there's three main takeaways in today's session if you try to kind of wrap up what we're trying to accomplish. And I think the first one, everyone probably knows that if you start to get into a DevOps world, you really need to embed automation into the entire process. I think a lot of us would agree you have to embed automation into all of your management, all of your IT tasks. But when you start to do a DevOps world, it really becomes critical. The second thing that's we're really seeing is that we've built up a ton of knowledge, most of you have, over the last 2 years using PowerShell in your own organizations, automating your own tasks, completely managing everything with PowerShell. As you start to embrace the cloud and you want to bring that knowledge forward, you want to make sure all of those learnings actually carry forward, and you can just start to enable the cloud inside your organization to actually adopt those and manage them, just like you're managing them today, using the same skill sets you've learned over the last few years. And the third thing is you're probably starting to notice that as we go into the cloud and as we do hybrid, we're actually getting to a point where there's a lot of Windows and Linux that's actually being managed together. And so you really want to be able to understand how do you actually manage those Windows environments and those Linux environments in a consistent way so you can enable all those applications to get developed. So what is the DevOps lifecycle? At a high level, it's pretty easy really to understand. It's very simplistic. It's always challenging to actually implement. But at a very high level, what we're talking about is the business are constantly trying to get more value out to your end users. And so you have all these business teams, and we have them inside of Microsoft as well, where there's this challenge of how do I keep enabling more and more requirements to be delivered into the application so that the end users can get that value. And there's a lot of competition we're seeing. And so that challenge of how do I continually release new capabilities is a requirement. And then we have to figure out all of the operational requirements we have to manage those. How do those get implemented at the same time? Because what we sometimes end up doing is the applications go out, but then they're not well managed. So if something goes wrong, there's a security issue, or it's not backed up, then you're scrambling trying to figure out how do we actually get this back to a known good state again. And so we're trying to figure out is how do we bring these two sides of the house together so they can work and offer that business value. And the main thing we're going to talk about really is the continuous management part. And the reason we focus on this is there's a lot of tooling and knowledge about how to build the applications, and development teams have been doing this for a while. But the challenge really is how do we bring all of the operational requirements that IT has into the system so that they can actually deliver the value through those applications, but they're delivered in a way that you can actually manage them how you need to. And when I was kind of building out this slide, I thought a little bit about the journey we went on ourselves. I used to work in the Windows and then System Center teams. And I remember building those products and then releasing them out to you. And then we would work with you to figure out, OK, how do I get these deployed? And then all these workloads get deployed on these. What are all the requirements around IT has on these? And so you'd be doing a bunch of work to secure them and back them up, protect them. All of those things you had to do as we gave you these products to actually build on top of. And then as I moved over into the Azure Automation side of the house, we were actually building the service ourselves. And then suddenly we had to start thinking about all these problems as well. And so it really came down to how do we actually try to solve those challenges of applying all those policies that we have inside of IT, but still allow us to continuously innovate into the automation service as we go forward. And so really how we approached this problem was we started to look, okay, what are those policies that have to get applied? Just like you have in your own organization, we have central security teams in our organization that said, hey, every time you deploy into any of the Azure services, they need to have these security packs installed so that they're hardened. And then we have like backup requirements that if you're using anything, it has to be backed up, and SQL has to be backed up. And all of these requirements come from central IT that we have to incorporate into our delivery of automation service. And then we have our own level of requirements to make sure they're always monitored and the monitoring agents installed. So all of those tasks, we now are part of that problem and trying to solve it. And so how we tackle that problem really is thinking about how do you start to bring these things together. And it really starts to say, what you need is you need visibility on both sides. So as we were building all these applications and all these capabilities into automation service, we needed to know what the requirements were from our IT counterparts on how we were supposed to deploy these, how they integrated, so that we didn't start stepping on each other's toes, and we'd start to bring the service down. And it was definitely a learning curve, for us. I used to see a lot when we'd work with customers like you when we were, deploying Windows and deploying System Center. But as you start to do it yourself, you really start to feel that pain, and then we said, okay, how do we go about solving this? And that's really where this idea of incorporating everything together so that you can see everything that's going on, but then automating the whole process. It's just there was no way that we could continually add more value to the service if we didn't automate and invest in all of the tooling required so that we could get all the operational requirements and the development requirements together and deploy it successfully. And so that was all of the kind of life cycle we had to go through, and I think everybody went through over the last few years as you're trying to maintain your applications and deploy that on-demand capabilities. So when you think about how did this actually work, what did we end up doing to kind of solve these problems, and what do we see a lot of our customers doing as they move into a DevOps world? So the first thing is we have the traditional, development application teams, and their requirements really are, they want to make sure they're monitoring their application, they want to get business insights out of their applications, they have all these automated tests they want to apply as they start to release new features, and they have a whole more set of requirements, and those are usually being driven by the development teams. But on the operations side, there's a whole set of tasks that we talked about that also have to get applied in order to successfully deliver that application and maintain it. And so these often are like, how is the infrastructure being monitored that's supporting that? How do you deliver secure deployments? Who has access to those deployments? How do you make sure that your workloads and data is all backed up? All of these requirements are coming from the operations teams, and we want to figure out how we integrate those together. And so how we think about solving this is you want to start applying all of those operational tasks into the source control system as well. And so you can leverage all of the existing tool sets you have, but you really need to get it embedded into the overall process. And the development teams are already doing this with their application requirements, but now you can see everything together. So whose role is, who's responsible for what? That still applies, but now it's all coming together at the same time. And then what we ended up doing is we leverage all of the new Microsoft tooling that's available as you start to move things towards the cloud, as well as manage your traditional hybrid environments. And so a lot of these toolings like Visual Studio Team Services, Azure Resource Templates, all of the Azure Automation services we showed today, as well as PowerShell and all of the new capabilities that's coming in Cloud Shell, all of those can actually help you deliver your applications as you go out. And we actually went through this process ourselves. So as we were delivering our own service, we actually used our own automation service to automate the delivery into the Azure backend. And so that was all based on our automation service and based on top of PowerShell. And then we would do the same type of things where we hook up all the monitoring, all those requirements, the security packs, all of that came together. We had visibility into everything, but we would roll it out together. But the unique challenge that happens a lot in the hybrid world is, in some ways, we had a lot of challenges, but we were delivering everything into Azure, so we had a lot more control on how that was getting delivered. The reality is, for a lot of you, you're living in a hybrid world where some of your applications are going into Azure, some are staying on premises, and you still have those requirements of managing both of them and making sure the same requirements and policies you have get applied. And so that's where we extended a lot of our services to make it very easy to actually enable a hybrid managed environment and a hybrid deployed application. Okay, so I'm going to jump in, since you kind of got the overall concept of what we did and how we see a lot of our customers doing it, and give you a little bit of visibility into a demo of how this works so as you can understand how the automation services play a role inside of this. Okay, I'm going to switch over. Perfect. So what I did for this demo, just trying to reinforce all of the tooling we have, is I built a simple application that is hosted locally on my machine here. And then I have basically built out an automated deployment so that it will roll over directly onto Azure as an approval takes place. And you can see here's it up on Azure. And here's my local environment that's running inside my local host. But what you want to do is to say, OK, that's what the end result wants to be. We just want to be able to do development and then have it completely managed, monitored, backed up, all of those things, but have it transparent to the overall delivery of the application. So what you can end up doing, we talked about that source control, is one of the main approaches you do is, as the development teams are building their applications, you also want to start to apply your policies into the overall delivery of those. So they have visibility into what's going on, but you are the one that has to set and enforce those requirements. And so inside of here, you can see I have an automation folder, and it has all the policies and the templates we need to deploy. Everything that IT might be responsible for is actually delivered inside of this automation system. And obviously, you can edit them inside of here in Visual Studio, but you could just edit them directly inside of here, too. So here's a couple that I do as part of this demo. So one was I actually go change the connection strings of the application so they're pointing to the production databases that are up in SQL, because just like in our world, our development teams, we don't have access to the production data. Only the very specific operations teams have access to any production data. And so all of those secrets need to be kind of separated out from the code and then applied as the application gets rolled out. But similarly, all of the configurations you want to do. So here's how I want the application configured. And this is where it becomes very relevant that you work closely with the development teams, because there'll be responsibilities that you'll have around, so if I go down to the bottom down here, you can see I'm installing a monitoring agent as part of this configuration deployment. But the application teams can see what we're doing with it, but they can also install their own applications. So what they need to do is they need to install websites, they need to install their own application. All of this is defined in desired state configuration using the service and then automatically delivered. So that's really how you can start to bring all these different capabilities together. And in this application, it's doing a couple of things. One, it's deploying everything up into Azure, but it's also deploying a Linux box locally on premises. And so this one leverages our DSC, desired state configuration service, but it's leveraging installing MySQL and Apache onto the local machine in my local environment. Sure. Sorry. So it's a simple, if you haven't seen configurations, how many of you are familiar with any of the PowerShell desired state configurations? Awesome, almost everyone, which is great. So hopefully it's not something new to you. And what we've seen doing is, as you build up more and more of these configurations, you can end up making them into composite resources, and then you can start leveraging those so that they don't get too large as you build them out. OK, so that's kind of how the overall flow looks like. But I want to jump in and show you a little bit about how does the automation service take care of all this. So I'm going to do a quick change here. So let's say I just want to change the application. And instead of saying, welcome to Azure Automation and PowerShell, I'll say, add in Cloud Shell. Have you guys seen the PowerShell in Cloud Shell? Hopefully you have. If you haven't, we're going to show it later on. But there's a new capability we have as well. So I'm just going to save this. I could basically reload here if I was testing locally, make sure it's all good to go. And then I'm going to check that in and kick off a process. And then all of the automation, all of those requirements we have around policy, backup, security, monitoring will get applied as this application rolls out. OK, so now it has Cloud Shell. So let me do a quick check-in here. I'll just go over to Teams. And I'll see pending changes. There's the one. So the good thing about this, if you had any of the automation changes you wanted to do, they would also show up in the same source control. So I'll check this in real quick. And go to Home. And I'm going to kick off a build. And then we'll walk through how the automation actually helps deliver this. So here's a simple one. And Queue New Build. So this is integrated into VS Team Services. I'm going to queue it, and it's off and running. OK, great. So that's going to go, start off a whole deployment of those changes into your environment, and all the automation is going to get applied to it. So I'm going to jump over. This one, actually, when I deploy it, it waits for an approval before it moves to the next step. So let me go into the automation real quick. So if you go into the portal, hopefully you can see, I'll zoom in, thank you for the feedback on, as I highlight some things. But inside of the Azure portal, we have a service called Automation on the left-hand side here. And if you click into that, I have one created that's driving this called Ignite 2017. And this is where we really invested all of our automation and configuration capabilities into the service. So leveraging this, you get the ability to manage all of your Azure environment, as well as manage all of your on-premises environments, all from a single location. And we really break the service into three major areas. The first is around configuration management. So this is where all that PowerShell desired state configuration shows up and allows you to easily manage them. Similarly, we give rich inventory and change tracking capabilities across your entire infrastructure inside of a portal. The other major feature we have is update management. And so one of the things we want to make sure is all of those security policies you can apply inside the delivery of this. And so that's where you can manage all your update management. And we had a session yesterday that went deeper into update management and some of the configuration stuff. And the last thing on the left-hand side you'll see is where we do our process automation. So this is where the PowerShell really lights up when you're trying to automate all those different tasks and orchestrate everything together. And the last thing I'll call out on the left-hand side, just so you can kind of see everything that we have, is we have a whole set of capabilities that are shared across all our automation and configuration services. And so we have rich scheduling capabilities. You can import modules. You can see the build just completed there. All your credentials can be securely stored, all your certificates, everything can be brought into the system, and it's automatically deployed into your environment as you start to use those. And so this really becomes a rich platform that allows you to make reusable scripts as you build out these pretty rich and orchestrated scenarios. So I'm going to jump in a little bit just so you can see a little bit of how our service works. So if I go into the DSC, so you saw the configurations that I were modifying. You can see here I have 2 machines that are running in Azure. And I also have one which was installing Apache and SQL on my local data center. So I have those DSC configurations pointing all into this centralized location, so I can manage everything across my environment in one place. And if I drill into one, you'll see that we actually have this rich reporting available on all the compliance of that environment. So you probably saw when I was showing quickly inside of the ISE, here's all the different things we've installed onto that machine and we've configured correctly. We've enabled the Windows features, we've put a new website up, we've copied a bunch of files from Azure Storage, we've installed those files into the web application, we've turned on firewalls, we've installed a management agent. All of these things are automatically deployed as those applications go up, and you can drill in and get as much information as you need. And obviously, this, if you want to see the configuration, it's the same one I showed you inside of the ISE. So it looks identical to what we were showing earlier. So it's very declarative. You just declare what you want, and then the DSC service actually enforces that. But the nice thing is all of this management is happening from the cloud. So all that rich reporting you have, the module distributions to every node, everything, the signing, the security, all that is managed from the automation service, and it goes into your on-premises environment as well as your Azure environment. OK, so with that, I'm going to switch over, and Hemant is going to kind of show you the next big capability we have, and he'll talk about Cloud Shell.
Thank you.
So, 5.
Thank you, Eamon. So let's. OK, thank you, Eamon.
You're welcome.
And the clicker doesn't work. OK, so as we start the journey to the cloud, one thing we started talking about, how can we bring more of PowerShell to the cloud? So as part of Azure Automation, you already are using PowerShell in the cloud. So the next obvious step for us was how can we bring the PowerShell console experience to the cloud? And that's where the Azure Cloud Shell comes in. So Azure Cloud Shell essentially is an authenticated shell which allows you access to your Azure resources from anywhere. And with the addition of PowerShell, now you have a choice of the shell you want, whether you like Bash shell or PowerShell. And essentially, it comes with lots of built-in tools which are managed and updated by Microsoft. So you don't have to worry about, oh, which version of PowerShell should I install? What module should I install? Everything is available for you. So let me jump over to the demo and show you stuff. So you come to the portal. Here is the Cloud Shell. Click it. If I can click it. And you have the PowerShell. And in the drop-down, you have the choice to pick Bash versus PowerShell. So based on what you used last will be saved for you. So if the last time you use PowerShell, by default, we'll use PowerShell for you. If you use Bash, we'll start Bash for you. So one thing Eamon showed was he started a build, and it is waiting for approval. And if you get a notification when you're not near your office or on your environment, you can just go on your phone or any browser, open the Cloud Shell, and do things like approval. So the one thing I struggled was, hey, he's doing VSTS stuff. How do I go and do something with PowerShell and VSTS from the Cloud Shell? I can go and click the UI, but I'm not the UI guy. So you can easily find those modules. I know it's called VS Team. From the gallery. So this is hooked up to PowerShell Gallery. It goes to the PowerShell Gallery, says, hey, do I have something which is related to VS Team in the gallery, bring that information for me, and you can go and take the next step and install it. And once you install it, it is available for you in the next use. So even though we are running containers, we save the installed module, so the next session is available. And I already have installed it on my box or on my Cloud Shell. So I'm going to just find the command. So first, let's say get module, check if I have the same version. And you can see here the module version is the same 1.0.1, so there's nothing new update. And I can easily find commands from that module which deals with account, because first I have to authenticate to the account. And you will see here there will be 4 commands. Essentially, there are 2 of them, which is about add and remove. So let me go and do the addition, so I'm authenticated. And this is the account name. And for just the demo purpose, I have things saved in a file. In production, you don't want to do that. Don't go ahead and tweet like, oh, PowerShell team is using things in a text file. It's just for the demo purpose. So you go and authenticate yourself. And the next step you want to do is, hey, I'm authenticated. What kind of projects do I have? And you'll see all the projects. So the one that we are using is the demo side. And then, obviously, you can do a lot of those things through pipeline. But I'm showing you the command as one would discover. I'll do VS team approval dash project name demo site. And you will see here, right in your browser, that you have the status, oh, something is pending. And this is work done by Donovan Brown, and he has been very gracious about fixing things. He had this module with a name called team. We chatted, and he said, sure, team is a very generic name. I'll go and fix it. So in 2 days, he made all the changes just to make sure people get the right PowerShell experience when they start playing with it. And I can go ahead and approve it. And then that job that was waiting on approval can go ahead and proceed. So this is basically, you have that PowerShell console on your browser. You can run commands. You can find commands, do awesome stuff. But that's not all. This is not your regular PowerShell. This is regular PowerShell plus something more. And that something more is your Azure Drive. So in PowerShell, you have this notion of namespaces and PS drives. Similarly, we have done the same thing here to say, now you can navigate all your Azure resources just like you will navigate file system. Only thing you have to hit is dir. So by default, when you start the PowerShell in Cloud Shell, it opens in Azure Drive, and when you do listing ls or dir, you are finding all your subscription. And it's very easy to go to a subscription. So the one we are using, remember all this tab completion just works seamlessly. You don't have to remember, type the long names. You can give your subscription whatever name you want. PowerShell will come and help you to complete those names. And next thing you will do is list what's inside my subscription. And here, you will see there are 4 or 5 views. We give you a view of all your resources, or a view based on resource groups, or pop up the things like virtual machines, web apps, and storage at the top. So you can go and navigate those 2 or 3 things easily. And this is a preview release. So there's a lot of more potential here. A lot more things will come. Provide those feedbacks, and we'll go ahead and implement them. So now let me just go clean up and go to resource groups. So I'm in that demo, and in that subscription account, I'll go and find all the resource groups that I have. Again, navigation, I'm just not going to show everything here. And then you can go inside the resource group, find your compute, storage. So that's one thing. The second thing is, oh, you are in this new experience. How can we make even better for you? You can run normal command lists like Azure RM VM. And at this point, it will list all the VMs that I have across all my resource groups in that given subscription. And if I go inside a specific resource group, remember the values? You got 4 values here. Here are the things inside. I can go and call the same command again that you're, oh, wrong resource group. You can easily fix those mistakes. And you run, again, the same command. Now it's giving you 2 values. Because now it says, oh, I know which resource group you are in. So the command that you want to run should be run in that context. So we automatically pass the resource group to the underlying command list. So as the author of those command lists, you don't have to do anything. There's no magic. It's the same Azure PowerShell command list that you have on your box, but here you get a better experience, more contextual aware experience. The other thing is you have the notion of this cloud drive. This is the persistent store you have across your Bash environment and PowerShell environment, which lets you share files. You upload them. So here you have, here are the files. I have .cloud console, that's where Bash specific files are. .ps Cloud Shell is where PowerShell specific files are. And then anything else that you want. I have my own files, I saved them. And the great thing with Azure files is you can even mount them on your local box. So if you want to edit, play with them locally, you can do it, and it'll get reflected. And Cloud Shell is free from a compute perspective, but storage is the only thing that you pay in that storage group. So essentially, it's almost free. OK. One last, or couple of last things. So now you said, great, I have all this discoverability. What kind of tools do I have? So we baked in all the Azure PowerShell modules for you. And not just that, you have Git for source control. So you can easily clone any repo you want inside your cloud drive and have it with you during every time. And then you have editors, such as Vim. And you will notice when this file opens up here, since it's a PowerShell file, we know it's PowerShell. We should show the colors. Syntax highlighting is built in for you. And you'll notice at the bottom of the screen, it was saying starting language server. And essentially, what is going to do it for you, and I'm going to show you. is I can say get Azure RM VM IntelliSense in Vim for PowerShell. And automatically, obviously, once you complete the command, we know what parameters you want. You can type in the parameter name, and tab is the magic word here. And it also completes things like error action. And if it has any values, you can see those. So things which have validate set built in them, or the values we know, we'll just show it for you. And then you have the default help. So this is the default help for the Cloud Shell. Like, how do you get started with Cloud Shell? You want to know, play with it, and then you can see the URLs. You can click them, which is very obvious, right? If it's a URL, however, it should open up. You can go and see all the documentation. And that's not it. The next obvious step is having it integrated with the documentation. So if you go to Azure PowerShell documentation, you will see this easy try it button here. When you click it, it's using the same Cloud Shell for you, authenticated with your storage for you to use. And you can easily copy and paste and play and learn the things on the fly rather than downloading the module and then scratching your head. So one more thing which I should show. It's coming, I know. It should be back soon. Is one of the other tools that we have baked in is called PowerShell Core 6, the open source version of PowerShell available to you in the Cloud Shell, so you can play with it, get comfortable with it, along with Windows PowerShell there. So you don't have to even say, oh, even if my corporate policies doesn't allow me to download things from the GitHub, I can open a browser and play with it. And as you expect, it's in C program files, PowerShell, the version, PowerShell.exe. Oh, not CD. That will help if I don't CD into that. And again, in the browser, once it starts, it will use your authentication, connect it to Azure. Again, it's authenticating to Azure. And now you can leverage new things such as invoke rest method, tab completion works. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the PowerShell repos and list the contributors who have contributed. This is the old way of doing things. And now you have follow related links. So instead of getting information page by page, in PowerShell Core 6, we say, oh, we know there are a lot of pages. Let's go and follow them and get all the information for you. So here, you have everything in $X. Sort them by the name.
You want .login?
Oh.
I have to do that. Oh, no, just .login now.
Yep, sorry.
There we go.
All the people who have contributed up here, and you can see easily that number exceeds hundreds of them, about 103. So that's about PowerShell in Cloud Shell and how you can easily use it, even try out new stuff like PowerShell Core 6. And I'll hand it over to Joey to talk more about PowerShell Core 6.
Thanks, Emmett. So yeah, that's some awesome stuff. with Azure Cloud Shell. What's really cool as well, so I don't know how many of you have played around with the Bash Cloud Shell, but I'm also a huge fan of Bash in addition to PowerShell. It might not be as popular with all of you, but
Font.
Oh, the font. Excuse me. Thank you. There we go. Let's get nice and big here. So you know these work great together, and what we've done is actually take PowerShell 6, and now that it's open source and cross-platform, it runs great on Linux. So we've actually dropped the same PowerShell 6 beta that Hemant was just showing on the Windows PowerShell Cloud Shell into the Bash Cloud Shell. And so you'll see right here, we pop open beta 7. The same exact thing is going to happen. We're going to go ahead and authenticate into Azure automatically with your subscription context that you've got, and you're able to use PowerShell 6 in exactly the same way that you're using it on the PowerShell Cloud Shell from right here within Bash. So I'm going to give it another second here. It does have to go in, out to the cloud and pull all the context down. But once we're here, I can do the exact same thing, invoke REST method. We can go right up against the GitHub APIs. And as Hemant was showing, normally this would, this guy, whoop, we don't like home yet. Or end. And this is going to show the contributors. Again, this is only 30 because we haven't used the pagination feature. And then we do follow rel link, and we've got 100 and, oh, nope. $x.login, because we have 6 pages. So actually the object has all of the pages in there. So when we look at just the logins, we get 153 of them. And of course, it's the same set of folks. So you can take the same scripts you know, that you're building within the Windows PowerShell Cloud Shell, hand them off to some of your colleagues that might be a little more Bash inclined, and those scripts are going to run just fine from within the Bash Cloud Shell in exactly the same way. So pretty cool stuff. We're really, really excited about the Azure Cloud Shell. I want to hop back over to the PowerPoint here. Remember which one that is. Yep. And that's my clicker. This isn't working. So I'm going to be talking a little bit more about PowerShell 6. So how many of you have used PowerShell 6 already? Handful of you? OK. How many of you are not like allowed to touch beta applications of any kind? Yeah, some of you? OK. So yeah, we're still in beta. We released as an alpha about a year ago. We are rapidly approaching a final release of 6.0 here. So we really want to get out stable for those of you that can't play with beta software yet, or that absolutely are not deploying beta software to your environment. But one of the great things about PowerShell 6 is that it enables this concept of heterogeneous management, right? So the idea that we're cross-platform, it's very rare nowadays that you have a stack that consists wholly of Microsoft software or entirely of Windows Server machines. And it's very rare that you have a deployment that consists entirely of Linux machines. So in this sort of world where we've got all these resources across all these different platforms out there, PowerShell is really offering a very unique capability in that you have a single heterogeneous or ubiquitous scripting language across all these platforms, so that you can target them in the same way using the skills that you've already learned using PowerShell over the last 10 years. So first thing I want to talk about is Windows PowerShell versus PowerShell Core. So this is sort of a notion that can be a bit confusing at first, but it really comes down to a few key differences. So Windows PowerShell is the traditional version of PowerShell that's been available on Windows for the last 10 years. It represents PowerShell 1 through 5.1. And it's only available on Windows and Windows Server, and will forever only be available on Windows and Windows Server. PowerShell Core, on the other hand, is available on Windows, Mac, and Linux. And the reason we're able to do that is because it's built on top of the .NET Core Core CLR libraries. So basically, .NET took the .NET framework that Windows PowerShell was built upon, and they open sourced it, ported it to Mac and Linux, and labeled it as the .NET Core framework. No, shouldn't use the word framework. .NET Core libraries, runtime. So that thing has allowed us to sort of spread out across platforms. And as a result of that, we've come out with this sort of separate PowerShell edition, the PowerShell Core edition. So if you look at PowerShell version table, you can actually see on Windows PowerShell we've got this desktop edition and then the Core edition. And so if you're scripting against the two and you need a different piece of functionality to operate differently on Windows PowerShell versus PowerShell Core, you can check against this PS version property in order to do that. So the pillars of PowerShell Core as we were building it out, we had some key principles that we really wanted to enforce as we were thinking about this sort of next generation PowerShell that was going to be everywhere. One of them was ubiquity. Same thing I said before, you guys have these heterogeneous environments, so we made sure to build PowerShell for Windows, Mac, and Linux. Similarly, we know many of you out there have MacBooks, so you're not going to be running server workloads on macOS, obviously, but you do have the PowerShell client available to you in order to use Azure PowerShell or any of the other number of modules that work on top of PowerShell. We also built PowerShell Core with cloud in mind, right? So one of the improvements that we've been touting is, we've got this follow rel link on invoke rest method. We actually have made a large number of enhancements to both invoke web request and invoke rest method to sort of live in the world or work better in a world where REST APIs and cloud APIs are everywhere, right? So almost anything that you guys do now against a web service is going to be exposed via REST API. And as a result of that, we wanted to make sure that we're talking to REST in the appropriate way, following all the sort of standards that exist out in the world, and really do a great job of consuming JSON as well. So convert from and to JSON. We've made a number of improvements to be more compliant with the JSON standards that exist out there. And we also recognize that we have an unbelievably awesome community. We love you guys. You guys love PowerShell. It's just been absolutely amazing to be a part of the PowerShell community. And so for that reason, we decided to make PowerShell 6 open source. And what this means is that we're able to work with you guys really at step 1 of the process, or even step 0 of the process. So everything we put up, we do it all out in the open. All of our designs are floated as RFC documents, review for comment documents, that you're allowed to comment on or even contribute some of your own if you have an awesome feature idea. We have a ton of people. If you haven't seen PowerShell Unplugged, Jeffrey's session from yesterday, he showed off a ton of enhancements that have been made by people in the community who are just really fixing things that bothered them about PowerShell and really make it better for everyone. So that's been really, really awesome. So the versioning thing is a little bit wonky here as well, right? So we've got PowerShell 5.1 and then we've got PowerShell 6. And it's built on top of the core CLR, which means there's some differences in how the DLLs get loaded. There's some differences in the API surface area available to binary commandlets in PowerShell. So 6 is greater than 5, right? Like, what makes 6 better or different than 5.1? So everything that is essentially just part of PowerShell. So excluding anything with .NET like add type or new object or any of the static methods, C#-based commandlets that use DLLs, for just the stuff that's written in PowerShell, all of the features and language aspects of PowerShell that were in 5.1 are equal or better in 6. There are a couple exceptions today. 2 of those that I want to call out are workflows and snap-ins. Those are 2 features of PowerShell that we will not be bringing forward into PowerShell 6. Although we are very customer-driven and community-oriented, so if somebody's really passionate about this thing and there's enough support for that, all of these things are sort of on the table for discussion at all times. But today we've said for 6.0 we're not bringing those 2 features forward. DSC resources today do not run in the PowerShell 6 engine. There's an awesome blog, if you grab these slides later, that I linked to about the DSC roadmap and where DSC is headed. So you can see how PowerShell 6 will fit into the DSC strategy in the future. And then we have a handful of missing commandlets in PowerShell itself. So there's a few commandlets that we haven't yet had the chance to port over. But for the most part, the vast majority, something like 90% of the built-in PowerShell commandlets, not the ones shipping with Windows, but those actually part of the PowerShell engine, come with PowerShell 6. Now, with all these other modules, so you've got all these modules in Windows like storage, networking, Hyper-V, all these Windows Server role modules, you could say. Many of those depend on CDXML or SIM, right? WMI v2. All of those work great as well. So we've actually added this Windows PS module path module in the gallery that allows you to essentially point at the existing Windows PS module paths and load those modules into the new version of PowerShell Core 6. It will also attempt to load any of the DLL-based modules. Many of those happen to work great today because of this thing called .NET Standard 2.0, which essentially allows legacy .NET Framework modules to be loaded, or DLLs to be loaded into the .NET Core. I don't want to get into the technical nitty-gritty of all that today, but it does enable a bunch of other Windows modules to work as well. In the future, we're going to be working with all of those roles and features owners in Windows to make sure that they are .NET Standard 2.0 compliant, so that over time, more and more of those role-based modules will work against 6. But today, when you install 6, you do not have to replace 5.1. This isn't an all-or-nothing installation like WMF was. You can actually, well, by default, it installs as an MSI, and then you can actually install it through a portable zip as well. So you could just unzip this folder to your desktop, double-click on PowerShell. It's not going to touch any of your existing PowerShell binaries or modules, and you can play around with it right there. So I'm going to actually show that right now. We're going to hop on over to my machine.
Change the...
Yep. So, over here, I've got PowerShell 6 Beta 7 running just fine. As I said, this doesn't impact the existing PowerShell on the machine at all. I've still got Windows PowerShell running right here. You'll note these different editions. So I've got the PS edition of Desktop and PS edition of Core. We've added some other properties here, like OS, because we've got different OSs now. So all you have to do in order to get this backwards compatibility module is to install the Windows PS module path module, which I've already done, so I'm not going to hit enter, but that's all it is. And you'll see I've got get module list available Windows PS module path, right? So all you have to do is either at runtime, you can add this to your profile as well. Just run this add Windows PS module path commandlet, just like that. You know what? I'm actually going to show this one more time. So if we look right now, we haven't run this in this run space yet. So if we look at all the modules that are available on the machine. Oh, I have run this one already. Sorry about that. Let's do this one more time. So this is without having run the Windows PS module path commandlet. I have a small set of commandlets that I've installed that work great with PowerShell Core. And then I add the Windows PS module path. And now I have a whole bunch of other modules available to me. Now we caveat that many of these modules will not work today. However, if you know what you're doing and you want to just give them a try, many of them happen to work great. So for example, get VM. I have to run as an administrator. Get VM works just great. Get network adapter. If I've got it here. Excuse me, get net adapter. Get net adapter works just great, right? These are all commandlets that weren't built with PowerShell Core in mind. And in fact, the teams have done nothing to port them over to PowerShell Core, but they work great. So I highly encourage you to check out the Windows PS module path folder, try out PowerShell 6, play with this backwards compatibility. We're going to have some documentation out very shortly for those of you module developers out there who also want to bring your modules over to PowerShell Core if they don't work great already. So keep your eyes peeled on the blog. I'll be doing like a technical deep dive on all the Net Standard 2.0 stuff very soon. Cool. So let's hop back over to the slides. And I want to switch gears a little bit. This is not the remote I was using. And talk about remoting. So the other aspect of PowerShell 6 that makes it awesome is that as a remoting client that works on any kind of machine, I can now target a Windows server, for instance, from my MacBook without having to pop open a RDP session and open up PowerShell manually through a GUI, right? So I can just install PowerShell natively on my MacBook and remote into the box. Now, in the past, all of PowerShell remoting was handled with this protocol called WSMan. Some of you may have heard it referred to as WinRM. That's the implementation in Windows. And then we plumbed this PowerShell remoting protocol over that in order for these rich PowerShell objects to be delivered over the wire. You interact with those with these enter or new PS session commandlets. And at the end of the pipeline, you receive these objects that you can manipulate from a remote box. Now, in the rest of the world, beyond Windows, the ubiquitous networking and remoting protocol used for authentication, authorization, secure transport of secrets is called OpenSSH. And so OpenSSH, we've sort of embarked on a project over the last couple years to port OpenSSH to Windows. So we've been working very closely with the OpenBSD Foundation that owns the open source management of OpenSSH to make sure that we can bring it into Windows actually in the Fall Creators Update. So there's going to be a beta, optional feature of OpenSSH inside of the Fall Creators Update or the new version of Windows Server. I think it's 1709 that's going to come out. And there'll be a blog up very shortly for how you're able to install that. But we've also got bits available on GitHub that work down level to Windows 7 and down level to 2008 R2 that you're welcome to try out. So those are just the native binaries, right? We've got this SSH client that's going to connect to an SSH server. They're just executables. And when you do that for a terminal remoting experience, you're going to get text over the wire, right? And because Bash and any number of the Linux or macOS shells are text-based, this makes a lot of sense because I type some characters, they get sent over the wire, those characters come back, or a response gets sent back as text, and those guys are happy. But we in PowerShell love objects, right? We all want to have these properties and methods that we can manipulate on whatever we're receiving in our terminal. So what we've done is we've taken the PowerShell remoting protocol that had traditionally been plumbed over WinRM, and we've slapped it on top of OpenSSH. So now you can actually use an OpenSSH server to send PowerShell objects back and forth over the wire using the same commandlets with a brand new parameter set that talk OpenSSH. So I'm going to go ahead and show this right now. Let's get this going. So first I want to show plain old SSH, right? So this is the traditional SSH sort of workflow. I should make this bigger here. I apologize. Let's go to 24. So this is just plain old SSH.exe, right? And I'm going to go ahead and connect to a machine that's been set up on premises. So this is not a cloud joined machine, but one inside of a domain. And this is a Linux box, right? So this is awesome. No PowerShell necessary. Like that SSH binary will run just great in CMD. I can connect to a Linux machine with something that ships in Windows and just get the classic Bash experience right here. Now, fortunately, we've already installed PowerShell on this machine, so I can just pop PowerShell open and use it as you'd expect. You can see PS version tables right here. PS readline works right here. Tab completion works here. But we're actually getting strings back at the pipeline, right? So I'm still like sitting in a terminal on that Linux box, typing things, and strings are getting returned, and I'm just sort of seeing a text-based projection of what's happening over there. So we really would rather use PowerShell remoting so that we can leverage all the power of invoke command and enter PS session and all that good stuff. So all I have to do in order to do that is pop open my OpenSSH server config. I'm going to scroll down to this subsystem line, and I've left it in here commented. But I just delete this character to uncomment it, and you'll see we're basically just registering PowerShell with the OpenSSH server. We're saying we want to run it in this subsystem mode, that -sshs, and without a profile. So I'm going to write that file. All I have to do is restart the SSH service. Great. And then I'm going to go ahead and leave this box. So now I can actually create a PowerShell session over SSH with the new PS session command. So you'll notice a few key differences here. So instead of the computer name parameter, we're using the host name parameter, and instead of a credential parameter, I'm using a username. So this works great for those of you familiar with key-based authentication, and OpenSSH works great with keys. I haven't set it up for that today, so I'm prompted for a password. And that's going to go ahead and create a PowerShell session object that I can manipulate, if I put in my password right. Oh, I know what's happening. This is the wrong username. This is what you get for changing things in your demo at the last minute, isn't it? Cool. So now you'll see I've got this Linux SSH PS session object. And you'll see that the name that was created actually is SSH1 to denote that this is SSH, right? And I can enter that thing. And boom, here I am sitting on that Linux machine in a PowerShell shell with everything being rendered as objects on the machine that I'm on. And you know, everything looks great, right? OK, so whoop, that was a lot of Python running. Wow. OK. So let's say that I have a bunch of machines, right? I've got this Linux machine on premise. I've also got a Windows machine that's actually running up in Azure. So we still totally support all the WinRM constructs in PowerShell 6. So I'm going to create the new PS session with the traditional computer name and credential. I'm going to be prompted for a password right here. And now I've got a Windows WinRM-based PS session object, right? OK, so great. I've got these two things. I can enter into that PS session, or I could enter into the other one. Like, why have these objects, right? Well, with invoke command, I can call, use these two session objects. So we've got Windows WinRM and Linux SSH. These are using different protocols. Pass it those sessions, and then give it a script block. So this is actually going to run get process over two completely different networking protocols on one on-premise machine running Linux and one Azure portal machine running Windows. So it's collecting all those. I think those Pythons are probably taking a second here. So now that we've got that object, boom, we've got these processes all just mixed together. I'm going to say, let's run this not like Python. So we'll run. We'll say where object name is not like Python. There we go. Runs a little bit faster. And you'll see here on the right, I've got these two different IP addresses. And the one IP address has your traditional Windows processes, and your Linux IP address has your traditional Linux processes. So this is really, really awesome, because I can run these scripts that check for different diagnostic pieces across different platforms, different environments, different protocols. Really, really cool stuff. How am I doing on it? We
15.
15? OK. Cool. So I also want to show really quick that we've gotten the Windows WinRM-based remoting working on Linux PowerShell 6 as well. So if I remote into a box, this is not the terminal I want. If I remote into a box that has been properly configured, I'm going to put in my password here. OK, so this again is a Ubuntu machine. It's got PowerShell installed. This one is also running in the cloud. And from here, I want to actually connect to that same Windows machine running in the cloud. Now, today we have a limitation that we only support basic authentication and NTLM authentication, although we are looking into Kerberos authentication very soon. And of course, that doesn't want to paste, so we're just going to type it out real quick. we're going to give it a credential here. And we're going to have to say dash authentication negotiate, which is going to fall back to NTLM. But now, from a Linux box, I've got a WinRM PS session object. So again, this means that if you run Linux on your main machine, or you have a Linux jump box that you use to proxy into an environment, or you've got a MacBook that you want to use to remote to a Windows server, you can do that from PowerShell 6. And all the modules, once you're on the other side, you've entered that session. So again, I'm here, PS version table, running PowerShell 6 on a Linux machine. And then I can enter PS session. And I'm now on a Windows server running 5.1, right? So again, this is like just the full matrix of everything, working with everything on all the versions. So whatever you want to do, we're empowering you to do that. Cool. Very cool stuff. So where can you get it? Again, it's up on GitHub right now. We've got a releases page, a wiki that's got a ton of information about how you set up everything. You want to dive into the key-based authentication stuff, how you ACL those keys and generate them, so on and so forth. We're also going to be shipping, as I said, as an optional feature in Windows Creators Update, or Fall Creators Update, and the Windows Server 1709 update. Watch the PowerShell blog for announcements. We're going to explain how to install that very shortly. That is going to be a beta. That's shipping there, and we hope that it will be, quote, production ready very soon. We've also got a couple limitations for now that we're working through. Right now, Linux to Windows, as I said, only supports BASIC and NTLM auth. Unfortunately, Apple removed a lot of the NTLM functionality from macOS, and so we only support BASIC auth there. But we do want to bring Kerberos authentication to macOS as well. And then the PSRP, the PowerShell remoting protocol over SSH, is currently only supported by PowerShell 6. We're not set in stone on whether that's going to be the case forever, but if you absolutely need it in 5.1, make sure to come to GitHub and explain your scenario to us, file an issue, and make sure that we understand that how we can meet your needs best.
You have to go back. You have to go back.
I got it.
So thanks, guys. I'm going to hand it back over to Eamon. He's got some more awesome stuff to show, but really excited about PowerShell 6, and come hang out with us on GitHub. We are really, really open about everything. Just come file issues, and for screwing up, make sure we know it.
Awesome.
Thanks, guys.
Okay, great. We just have a few minutes left, but I wanted to kind of cover a couple of things. One is, we kind of talked a little bit about all the PowerShell work we've done, everything we're bringing into Azure so that you have the Cloud Shell available there. But all of those automation configuration services, too, they're really designed around you managing your hybrid environment. And so all of the features we've built in are really dedicated towards how do you manage those on-premises environments as well as your cloud environments at the same time. And so the 3 or 4 major things I called out, I wanted to bring it up just so you know everything we do is in the cloud as well as through a hybrid worker. So this is all available to you. There's some great content online, but it's also very easy to try it out. So if you go into the portal, click on automation, all these capabilities are available to you, and it's easy to hook up and get all that additional functionality. Okay, with that, I'm going to do one quick thing and go back to the slides here, which I was on. If I can go next.
A lot of laptops.
There we go. Okay, so we have just a couple minutes left. You guys will wait with us. We want to show a couple of things you can do fun with PowerShell that, as we're going through the sessions and we're doing all these things. So I'm going to go back here real quick and show you what's going on. So the first thing, I'll go back into the portal. So you remember I had that page. I'm actually going to chance it, and I don't know if I hit F5 what will happen here. I'll try it. Maybe nothing. Let me see if the other one. Oh, yeah. There it is. So if you remember, I added that Cloud Shell at the beginning of the session, and then Hamilton went ahead and approved it. And so as we're working our way, doing all these things, going through everything, you can see the automation is kicking in the background. And basically with zero touch, we've gone from an on-premises where you're developing, and it's now deployed across a hybrid environment. So let me touch on one other thing while we're in here. So if I go back into the automation account, this is where all of our rich capabilities are. There's one thing I was building real quick. So while I was down here, we always trying to figure out how to get, from A to B, and there's all the different, taxis and transit and everything else going on. And we live over on the, Seattle, Washington side, and, our transportation's terrible there. So I was actually going to figure out, okay, how long is it going to take us to get, should we just drive or should we get transit as we go forward? So I actually wrote a couple of simple runbooks that actually do both of these things in PowerShell. So one, I have a simple one in PowerShell running in the cloud where you can author everything and deliver it. And this is just interacting with the Bing API, and I can give it the start and end, and it will go out and figure out exactly what to do. But similarly, we can do the same exact thing with something we've just launched in the automation service, which is Python support. So if you are a Python developer and you want to actually do everything in Python and not just in PowerShell, you can do all of that inside the automation service as well. And this one's actually interacting with the Google API and doing a start and end, and we'll actually find out where you're starting from and where you're going to. So again, the idea behind this automation service is really give you the flexibility to manage both your Windows, Linux, and in the language that you really want to use as you go forward. And so I'm going to switch. Hemant's going to do one quick one, and then we're going to wrap up.
So I know there's lots and lots of content here, and your head must be spinning. So when you are in that kind of a mode at work and you want some soothing effect, PowerShell's still for you there, and you can open a browser and just relax. If you don't like that, you can change it. Even if that is not good, you can just say, I want it in star mode, and so on, and so on.
Yeah, and similarly, we pulled out an old script that our good colleague Lee Holmes wrote back in I think in the PowerShell VE 1 or 2 days, and just said, hey, let's see if this will work on PowerShell 6. So I'm right here. I'm going to go ahead and run this burn console.ps1. I downloaded off his blog, and as it turns out, that thing runs just great. So from all the way from the V1, V2 days, we've made sure to not break this stuff going forward, and it's really cool to just try it and have it work.
So essentially, you can use PowerShell and set the world on fire.
That's it. Okay, so with that, I'm just going to wrap up here. And so really what you've seen here is that we're heavily invested in moving all of that knowledge you've had built up over the years with on-premises and bring it into the cloud. And so our overall goal is as you adopt the cloud and you adopt the hybrid cloud, you have the right tool set and the right innovation built in so you can start automating all of those tasks as you go forward. And I think the one thing to take away from here is it doesn't really matter what environment you're working in. We've built a set of capabilities through the Azure services as well as through PowerShell that allows you to bring both your developers as well as your operations teams together and actually have fun as you build out. And a lot of times we decide, are you in that reactive mode or are you in proactive mode? And the one thing we want to start to get you in is where you're in proactive mode. And that's really about managing your environment, take control of it, configuring it, automating it, so you don't spend all your time in that reactive monitoring mode. All right, so with that, we're going to finish up, and we'll close out. If you have some questions, please come up, and we'll try to answer them. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah, we've also got a ton of stickers. I don't know. How are we doing on posters?
We have 2 or 3.
We got a limited supply of posters we're going to throw up here as well, but. Yeah, definitely come check us out. We're at the Azure Automation and Configuration booth down in Azure Management, Security Management. Yes, so come grab some. We got more posters and stickers at the booth. Yeah, and if anybody has any questions, we get these microphones up here. You're more than welcome. We got 5 more minutes. I know we've got the. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, ask on the mic here. Let's get a good.
Yes.
So I got here a little late, but I did notice that DSC has support for Linux deployments as well, right? Is there any plan to allow other third-party configuration management like SaltStack or something to work on the Windows side a little better than it does right now?
So the question is, hey, DSC for Linux exists. We've got some support over there. Are there any plans to better support third-party config management tools the other way on Windows? So unfortunately, we can't control the roadmaps of a lot of those companies, but we have worked very closely with many of them in the past, including Chef and Puppet. They actually integrate via DSC on Windows, and so they've sort of wrapped those our DSC resources in a higher level of abstraction that fits with their config management model. We haven't worked super closely with them, but I also know that Ansible works great running PowerShell scripts on Windows. I can't speak to SaltStack, but you know, I would definitely recommend to them that would be a great move. Yeah.
Yeah, I just got a quick question. When it comes to the Cloud Shell, do you plan on maybe putting that in the portal for Office 365 as well?
So yeah, so the question is, how about Cloud Shell in the Office 365 portal?
So yeah, so that's a good question, and glad you asked. So we have reached out to those teams, and the first step we are looking into is to how do we integrate Cloud Shell in the Office 365 documentation to start with, and the next would be to go and talk to the teams. But one thing I want to emphasize a lot is we going and asking Office 365 has this value. You going and asking Office 365 has this value. So like, oh, you are PowerShell team, you're asking, maybe. Customer is asking, sure. So go and tell them, and we'll make it happen.
Yeah, I think there's an Office 365 developer user voice or a management user voice or something like that. You should definitely go blow that up on Twitter and get the votes in.
Cloud Shell, when you initially, or at least when it was first announced, when you initially deploy it, it creates a random storage account. Is support to specify a storage account in the roadmap or anything like that?
Yeah, so the question is, when you spin off the Cloud Shell, it randomly creates a resource group and a storage account is their plan. So actually, that's already there. So when you go and open it, there is a notion for advanced options. And in advanced options, it will let you pick the subscription and the storage account that you already have. The limitation is it has to be in the region that you are in, so we can mount it. If you are on the bash in Cloud Shell, you can use Cloud Drive Unmount. It'll reset your settings. It will leave the storage account as is, all the content, and next time you start it will pop up that UI again, and you can click the advanced. If you are doing it from the PowerShell in Cloud Shell, you can say dismount Cloud Drive, and it'll do the same thing, and when you start it again, it'll show you a pop-up.
All right, thank you.
Hi, is there going to be parallel development between 5.1 and 6 because it has to be in the box of Windows?
Right, so the question was, is there going to be parallel development between Windows PowerShell 5.1 and PowerShell Core 6, given that the former ships in box in Windows and the latter does not? And the answer is yes, there currently is parallel development. The way that we do it, basically everything happens in GitHub in PowerShell Core first, and then we essentially port what we deem as critical fixes, security fixes, or features that you know, may help you migrate to 6 in the future, but we're trying to limit those things as much as possible. We believe pretty strongly that Windows PowerShell 5.1 is in a really stable, solid place, and actually one of the reasons that we didn't go ahead and just replace 5.1 with 6 is because we wanted to do some things in the language and fix some missteps of the past in 6.0, and we wanted to make sure not to break existing workloads in 5.1. So we want to make sure 5.1 stays really stable. In the future, as we get more of these roles and features onboarded to 6 and into .NET Standard 2.0, we think that it's possible that 6 could find its way into Windows, but we don't have a clear roadmap or plan there yet.
So there won't be a Windows 6 and a Core 6, probably?
There will likely not be a Windows PowerShell 6.0, no. Yeah.
So with the Cloud Shell, you showed the Azure Drive. Can you pass a path for that Azure Drive so it can kind of, if you wanted to parse through a bunch of different resource groups, could you pass it like multiple paths to?
So the question is, in Azure Drive right now, today you have to go into a specific directory and then do a dir and listing. Is it possible to pass a path so it can do it directly rather than traversing through from different things? So yes, we have talked about it. That's a great feedback. You should provide us on the user voice, and we'll make it happen.
Okay, and second question, is it in the plans to bring the Azure Drive down to an on-prem PowerShell session?
I was waiting for that question. So the question is there a plan to bring that Azure Drive out of the Cloud Shell and make it available on Windows 10 or Windows Server or Windows as well? So yes, we have worked with one of the projects our MVP did called Simplex and P2F, and we have built abstraction layer on top of it, and our plan is to open source in next week or two, pretty soon. It runs on desktop. It can run on my desktop, but obviously not everybody has it. So we will open source both the infrastructure on top of which we have built, as well as the module which we are calling Azure PS Drive on GitHub and Gallery.
And how about the that awesome Vim PowerShell plugin that was?
Yeah, shameless plugin. Yes. So the other question is, what about Vim integration with PowerShell or PowerShell integration with Vim? And that is also in works to be open source as well. So in next month or so, everything will be there. You guys can look at the code, build more hierarchical structures, and tell us what's broken or even help us fix it.
Awesome. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks.
Is there a way to do parallel for each loops in 6 if workflows aren't available?
So the question is there a way to do parallel for each loops in 6 because workflows are not available? The answer is that we've already written an RFC for native concurrency. So this is one of those review for comment, like specification documents I was talking about. If you go to github.com/PowerShell/PowerShell-RFC, you can find all those. So we've actually, we've got a draft of that RFC up. We're still looking for feedback in it. We want to start implementing that draft after 6.0 comes out. So it'll likely show up in 6.1, maybe 6.2. But given the number of people that want it and given the amount of people that we see using workflow for exclusively parallel processing, we know that it's a pretty popular off-requested feature. So I would say it's pretty likely you'll see that show up in 6.1.
And in the meantime, people can use?
In the meantime, people should use, Posh RS job, any of the shims that work on top of Posh RS job, like Invoke Parallel.
Right.
I'm blanking right now, but there's 3 or 4 really good ones in the gallery that get the job done for the most part, but we really want to bake it in close to the engine. Sorry, what did you say? I thought somebody said another.
No.
Okay, cool. No worries. Thanks though. Yeah, definitely. Thanks everyone.